Hello everybody and welcome to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and since it is the anniversary of Pickett's charge, I thought I would share with you a first-hand account of Pickett's charge written by Captain Robert A. Bright. He was on Pickett's staff when the charge happened. Early in the morning, July 3rd, Pickett's Virginians, 4,700 muskets with officers added, 5,000 strong, moved from the camping ground of the second day 2 miles in rear to the battlefield and took position behind the hill from which we charged later in the day. Then came the order from headquarters. Colonel E.P. Alexander will command the entire artillery in action today, and Brigadier General Pendleton will have charge of the reserve artillery ammunition of the Army. Later, General Pickett was informed from General Longstreet's headquarters that Colonel Alexander would give the order when the charge should begin. Several hours later, the batteries on both sides opened. Had this occurred at night, it would have delighted the eye more than any fireworks ever. 3 times General Pickett sent to Colonel Alexander asking, "Is it time to charge?" The last messenger brought back his answer, "Tell General Pickett I think we have silenced 8 of the enemy's guns, and now is the time to charge." General Pickett ordered his staff, 4 in number, Major Charles Pickett, Captain Baird, Captain Symington, and myself, to General Armistead, Garnett, and Kemper, and to Deering's artillery battalion, which earlier in the day had been ordered to follow up the charge and keep its caissons full. Orders to the other staff officers I did not hear, but I was sent to General Kemper with this order: "You and your staff and field officers to go in dismounted, dress on Garnett, and take the Red Barn for your objective." During the charge I found Kemper and Garnett apparently drifting too much to the left, and I believe it was because the Red Barn was too much to Kemper's left. General Pickett would have altered the direction, but our left being exposed by the retreat of Pettigrew's command, our men and 10,000 more were needed to the left. When I reached General Kemper, he stood up and removed a handkerchief from under his hat, with which he had to cover his face to keep the gravel knocked up by the fierce artillery fire from his eyes. As I gave the order, Robert McIntosh Jones, a friend and schoolmate of mine, called out, "Bob, turn us loose, and we will take them." Then Colonel Lewis Williams of the 1st Virginia Regiment came to me and said, "Captain Bright, I wish to ride my mare up." And I answered, "Colonel Williams, you cannot do it. Have you not just heard me give the order to your general to go up on foot?" He said, "But you will let me ride. I am too sick today, and besides, remember Williamsburg." Now Williamsburg was my home, and I remembered that Colonel Williams had been shot through the shoulder in that battle and left Miss Judge Tucker's house on the courthouse green. This I heard, for I missed the fight, so I answered, "Mount your mare and I will make an excuse for you." General Garnett, who had been injured by a kick while passing through a wagon train at night, had been allowed to ride. Colonel Hunton of the same brigade also rode, being unable to walk. He fell on his one side of the Red Barn and General Kemper on the other side. So there were 8 mounted officers, counting General Pickett and the staff, mounted in the charge. Colonel Williams fell earlier in the fight. His mare went riderless almost to the stone wall and was caught when walking back by Captain William C. Marshall of Deering's battalion. His own horse, Lee, having been killed, he rode Colonel Williams's mare after the fight. When I returned to General Pickett from giving the order to General Kemper, Symington, Baird, and Charles Pickett were with the general, they having less distance to carry their orders than I, as Kemper was on our right, and Armistead not in the first line but in echelon. The command had moved about 50 yards in the charge, and General Pickett and staff were about 20 yards in the rear of the column. When we had gone about 400 yards, the general said to me, "Captain, you have lost your spurs today instead of gaining them." Riding on his right side, I looked at once at my left boot, and saw that the shank of my spur had been mashed around, and the rowel was looking toward the front, the work of a piece of shell, I suppose, but that was the first thing I knew of it. Then I remembered the Irishman's remark, the one spur was enough, because if one side of your horse went, the other side was sure to go. When we had charged about 750 yards, having about 500 more to get over before reaching the stone wall, Pettigrew's brigade broke all to pieces and left the field in great order. At this time we were mostly under a fierce artillery fire. The heaviest musketry fire came farther on. General Pettigrew was in command that day of a division, and his brigade was led by Colonel Marshall, who was knocked from his horse by a piece of shell as his men broke, but he had himself lifted on his horse, and when his men refused to follow him up, he asked that his horse be turned to the front. Then he rode up until he was killed. If all the men on Pickett's left had gone on like Marshall, history would have been written another way. General Pickett sent Captain Symington and Captain Baird to rally these men. They did all that brave officers could do, but could not stop the stampede. General Pickett directed me to ride to General Longstreet and say that the position against which he had been sent would be taken, but he could not hold it unless reinforcements were sent to him. As I rode back to General Longstreet, I passed a small party of Pettigrew's command going to the rear. Presently I came to quite a large squad, and very foolishly, for I was burning precious time, I halted them and asked if they would go on up and help those gallant men now charging behind us. Then I added, "What are you running for?" And one of them, looking up at me with much surprise depicted on his face, said, "Why, good gracious, Captain, ain't you running yourself?" Up to the present time I have not answered that question, but will now say appearances were against me. I found General Longstreet sitting on a fence alone. The fence ran in the direction we were charging. Pickett's column had passed over the hill on our side of the Emmitsburg Road, and could not then be seen. I delivered the message as sent by General Pickett. General Longstreet said, "Where are the troops that were placed on your flank?" And I answered, "Look over your shoulder and you will see them." He looked and saw the broken fragments. Just then an officer rode at half speed, drawing up his horse in front of the general and saying, "General Longstreet, General Lee sent me here and said you would place me in a position to see this magnificent charge. I would not have missed it for the world." General Longstreet answered, "I would. Colonel Freemantle, the charge is over. Captain Bright, ride to General Pickett and tell him what you have heard me say to Colonel Freemantle." At this moment our men were near, but had not crossed the Emmitsburg Road. I started, and when my horse had made 2 leaps, General Longstreet called, "Captain Bright." I checked my horse and turned half around in my saddle to hear, and this was what he said: "Tell General Pickett that Wilcox's brigade is in that peach orchard, and he can order him to his assistance." Some have claimed that Wilcox was put in the charge at its commencement. General Gordon says this, but this is a mistake. When I reached General Pickett, he was at least 100 yards behind the division, having been detained in a position from which he could watch and care for his left flank. He at once sent Captain Baird to General Wilcox with the order for him to come on in. Then he sent Captain Symington with the same order in a very few moments. And last he said, "Captain Bright, you go." And I was about the same distance behind Symington that he was behind Baird. The fire was so dreadful at this time that I believe that General Pickett thought not more than 1 out of the 3 that was sent would reach General Wilcox. When I rode up to Wilcox, he was standing with both hands raised, waving and saying to me, I know, I said, "But General, I must deliver my message." After doing this, I rode out to the peach orchard, going forward where General Pickett was watching his left. Looking that way myself, I saw moving out of the enemy's line of battle, in the head of a column, a large force, having nothing in their front. They came around our flank as described above. Had our left flank not deserted us, these men would have hesitated to move in ahead of a column. When I reached General Pickett, I found him too far down toward the Emmitsburg Road to see these flanking troops, and he asked of me the number. I remember answering 7,000, but this proved an overestimate. Some of our men had been faced to meet this new danger, and so doing, somewhat broke the force of our charge on the left. Probably men of the 1st Virginia will remember this. I advised the general to withdraw his command before these troops got down far enough to left face, come into battle line, sweep around our flank, and shuts us up. He said, "I have been watching my left all the time expecting this, but it is provided for. Ride to Deering's battalion. They have orders to follow up the charge and keep their caissons filled. Order them to open with every gun and break that column, and keep it broken." The first officer I saw on reaching the battalion was Captain William C. Marshall. I gave him the order with the direction to pass it down at once to 3 other batteries. Marshall said, "The battalion has no ammunition. I only have 3 solid shot." I then asked why orders to keep caissons filled had not been obeyed, and he said the caissons had been away nearly 3/4 of an hour, and there was a rumor that General Pendleton had sent the reserve artillery ammunition more than a mile in the rear of the field. I directed him to open with the solid shot, but I knew all hope of halting the column was over, because solid shot do not halt columns. The second shot struck the head of the column, the other 2 missed, and the guns were silent. I found General Pickett in front about 300 yards ahead of the artillery position and to the left of it, and some 200 yards behind the command, which was then at the stone wall over which some of our men were going, that is, the 53rd Regiment, part of Armistead's brigade, led by Colonel Raleigh Martin, who fell next to the gallant General Armistead. He had reached the enemy's guns and captured them. All along the stone wall as far as they extended, Kemper and Garnett's men were fighting with but few officers left. I informed the general that no help was to be expected from the artillery, but the enemy were closing around us, and nothing could now save his command. He had remained behind to watch and protect that left. At this moment, our left, Pickett's division, began to crumble, and soon all that was left came slowly back. 5,000 in the morning, 1,600 were put in camp that night. 3,400 killed, wounded, and missing. We moved back, and when General Pickett and I were about 300 yards from the position from which the charge had started, General Robert E. Lee, peerless, alone, on Traveler, rode up and said, "General Pickett, place your division in rear of this hill and be ready to repel the advance of the enemy should they follow up their advantage." I never heard General Lee call them the enemy before. It was always those or these people. General Pickett, with his head on his breast, said, "General Lee, I have no division now. Armistead is down, Garnett is down, and Kemper is mortally wounded." Then General Lee said, "Come on, General Pickett. This has been my fight, and upon my shoulders rests the blame. The men and officers of your command have written the name of Virginia as high today as it ever has been written before." Then turning to me, General Lee said, "Captain, what officer is that they are bearing off?" I answered, "General Kemper," and General Lee said I must speak to him, and he moved Traveler toward the litter. I moved my horse along with his, but General Pickett did not go with us. The four bearers, seeing it was General Lee, halted, and General Kemper, feeling the halt, opened his eyes. General Lee said, "General Kemper, I hope you are not very seriously wounded." General Kemper answered, "I am struck in the groin, and the ball has ranged upward. They tell me it is mortal." And General Lee said, "I hope it will not prove so bad as that. Is there anything I can do for you, General Kemper?" The answer came after General Kemper had, seemingly with much pain, raised himself on one elbow. "Yes, General. Do full justice to this division for its work today." General Lee bowed his head and said, "I will." I wish to mention here that Captain William I. Clopton, now Judge of Manchester, told me after the war that while General Pickett was trying to guard his left, he saw 27 battle flags, each with the usual complement of men, moved out on our right flank, but we did not see this, as all our thoughts were fixed on our left flank. Captain Symington and Captain Baird could each give many interesting incidents if they could be induced to write for publication.